Call this meeting to order. We get a roll call vote, please?
Mayor Larry Milton,
Yep.
City Administrator Kathy Stepp,
Here.
Alderman Ralph LeBlanc,
Here.
Alderman Chuck Rodriguez.
Here.
Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We're going to start off our agenda with some reports from Jan.
Mayor, members of the committee, we'd missed a meeting or two, so we've got the meeting, or the minutes from the July and September meeting. And just to kind of put it on your radar, we're collecting input from various brokers around the region with respect to our medical insurance renewal for 2023. We anticipate that we're going to close that out at the end of next week. And so we want to turn this around fairly quickly. So we're going to be asking for another special meeting here of this committee on the 1st of November. So just to put that out on your radar.
The record reflect, we'll start again at the beginning. Just pick a chair, any chair. Kevin McConnell has joined the meeting, so would you start again? No, just kidding. Hi, Kevin.
My apologies.
That's all right.
So our first thing that we have for today is approval of the minutes for July 20th and September 15th.
So has everybody had a chance to read those minutes? If so, I'd entertain a motion to approve. We need to approve those one at a time, I'm assuming.
I think they can be both at the same time, I believe.
Okay.
So moved.
We have a motion
A second.
and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you, Jan.
And just for the city administrator's benefit, we go through this approval process and then we will forward those on to the Board of Aldermen for acknowledgement. The next step is the discussion of new hires, promotions, and transfers. We've got quite a few on there that we're catching up with. As you can see, the promotions and transfers, they go back and forth. We've got one person who promoted and then quit. And so that's going to be one of those where you're going to see some anomalies through there. It's kind of an odd situation. But you can see Amber Edie, she transitioned from a police officer 1 to a police officer 2. That's just normal after they've been in position for 2 years. Jerry Leninger, he was promoted to the supervisor or the maintenance lead technician for parks. He replaced Mike Grammer. And then we've got Sean Reese, who was promoted to the plant operator 3 for wastewater treatment. And then, there's various ways. Sean was one, and I think if we scroll down, it's the Shane Randall and Sean Reese show there. They traded back and forth with various things. So it's one of those where it becomes, one promoted and then one replaced the other and so on. And then one left employment with the city. We've got, the one I really wanted to point out was the one at the bottom of that promotions and transfers. Two at the bottom. Crystal McDaniels she has come back from the fire department and she is going to take over in payroll, or has taken over in payroll. And, she's done a really solid job for us, found lots of mistakes from the past, corrected them, things like that. So those are the things I've got absolute confidence in her ability to take care of business down the road. She's also working on the final calculations for our incentive compensation that we've got, our retention payments that we're going to be given. She's doing the final calculations on that, and I hope to be able to share some good news with employees here shortly. And then the other one I want to point out is Cody Stice. He's coming on as our customer liaison with the Planning and Development Department. Cody was a supervisor in the Public Works area, and he's done a really good job for us over the past several years. He has, in taking on this customer liaison role, his role is going to be primarily to be that person that's there for the developer and the contractors to help them navigate through city processes and things like that. And Cody's done similar work like that in the past, went up in Springfield. We felt like he was going to be a good person to fill that role. It's a new role, and so there's no shoes to fill other than ones he creates for himself. So we're going to be all hands on deck to help him be successful in this role. So, and then when we scroll down, we've got some hires. We've got Dawn Backus, who's coming back. She was with the Utilities Department, came back to be in the Public Works Engineering. Kelly Keever is our new CAD specialist. We've got other folks through there, George Hensley, Eric Perriman. Amanda Ross replaced Fawn Rowe in Public Works and Engineering. And then we've got Cody Lowry, police officer who returned to us. He had left, thought he would try his hand at being a magician, and I'd like to see his show at some point, but he's come back. And then Bill Tyler, that is, when you look at it, it says rehire. That's kind of an anomaly there, because Bill was hired and then was not able to make it in time for the academy. So at that point, whenever an opportunity came open again, he was then offered the position and then, quote, rehired. So that's why you see him there. We've got Katie Reed, and she's coming in as a recreation specialist. And, oh, look, Kathy Stepp on there. So she's our new city administrator. And then we've got plant operator trainee Jesse Dunn coming in, replacing Brent Burnett. So anyhow, the premise behind this is to kind of give this committee, the aldermen, an idea of who new employees are. So if you see somebody and they introduce themselves, you go, oh yeah, I remember your name at this point. So anyhow, any questions on this before we move on? Okay. So if we would, let's move on to the next agenda item. And is this a regular slideshow, or is this just part of the?
It's just part of the.
Okay. All right. The one thing that we wanted to do in this situation is, for this staffing and salary study that we did, we wanted to show the methodology to this committee. Well, this thing?
It should.
Okay, great. We wanted to show the methodology to this committee to say, this is what we did, this is how we scored these things. We did it in such a way that we wanted to help ensure equity across the organization, because whenever you look at it, it's kind of like we lay all the pieces out on the table at the same time, and we look at what does this person do, what's this person do, and so on, and we have to come up with a methodology to score these so that everybody gets treated fairly across the entire organization. The foundation of this was the methodology that we used whenever we had Springstead come in 2016 to do our our salary study back then. And in that respect, they gave us that methodology that allowed us to go in and make adjustments and changes and things like that along the way. I will be brutally honest with you, a lot of times this was circumvented by directors that would say, hey, I want this person to make this much money, and so they would circumvent this process. And with the assistance of the city administrator, they would get the positions placed where they wanted, and so it kind of had a tendency to kind of mess up the overall structure for how we wanted to keep staff compensated or have them slated and such like that. I will say, and let me start out by saying, this entire thing was a tremendous undertaking. Kimberly Cooper did a fantastic job of assembling all this. She went through, evaluated all the job descriptions, met with all the directors, and reviewed everything, and then started assembling it. And she and I would work together on figuring out, okay, how's this scored? Does this make sense here? What are we going to do? How are we going to address these things, and so on? So she did, like I said, she did a fantastic job, and she worked with Baker Tilly in this process to establish a foundational piece for what our employee inventory is, for lack of a better term, so that at this point we understand how many positions we have, we know what openings we're going to have, and things like that along the way, so that in the past, whenever folks would come up with a great idea and say, I want to hire this person for this, well, you don't have an opening for that. Well, yeah, I do. So now we have that understanding across the board. So we have, the Human Resources Department now will maintain that and make sure that we keep a good eye on it, so that way we're not over budget and we can identify places where we have needs and openings and things like that. So when you look at, and why the slide presentation is in pink, it's just kind of one of those things. Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's calming. We started out looking at all the job descriptions, and we would look at them and evaluate them based on the criteria that we're looking for. And part of the issue, and when we do this function, the foundational piece is determining the skill level. And we'll walk through all of the pieces, but then once we determine the skill level necessary, then we'll look at all the scoring factors that we need to look at with respect to what's listed here: training and ability, experience, level of work, human relations skills, physical demands, work conditions and hazards, independence of actions, impact on end results, and supervision exercised. Those are those factors that we looked at for every single position in the city of Branson. So that way, we can look at somebody who's a wastewater treatment trainee. That person has, their training and ability, their training is going to be minimal. Their experience is going to be a minimal since they are a trainee. Their level of work could be higher, though, simply because of the importance of their job. Their human relations skills, that's going to drop off, and so on. So there's a lot of different things that we're going to look at. We'll walk you through all of those particular elements here. First, we, Kimberly, compiled all the recent job descriptions. She met with department heads and made sure that they were up to date. If there were any flaws or anomalies, it's because they hadn't updated them. We got some things were a little out of sync, but most everything should be up to snuff and things like that. And then we evaluated to see if we needed to review compared to like positions within the organization and recommend updates. Kimberly found several that she found, let's see, this one over here had this responsibility or had this experience level required or this education level. So those are the things that we tried to make sure that we smoothed out and made sure that they were consistent across the organization. Now, like I said earlier, the skill level is the foundational piece for looking at these things. The skill level 1 is essentially manual labor. Skill level 2 is going to be administrative support. human support and semi-skilled positions, things, like basic equipment operator type things. Skill level 3 is somebody who has more skill level support and such. And then you see the different levels going up as we progress, skill level 4, 5, and 6. And you get down to skill level 6, that's where the directors are going to be at that level. And some assistant directors are going to be at that level as well. When we go through and look at some of those, like a skill level 5 is going to be someone who's advanced in their skill level. So like an assistant director, on many of them, we'll look at it, say how frequently, how often do they have to step in for the director, and we'll score that as essentially a 5.5, if you will. So it requires that level of ability to be able to step in and take over. And also, one of the other thing, it's going to be a side component, and we'll talk about this in future meetings, is this structure is going to help us with succession planning, to be able to look at, see what are the elements of these positions and who are the incumbents in these roles, and what can we do to help migrate these people so that whenever we see retirements and turnover and things like that, that we can fill critical positions. So training and ability, to revert back to this, the basic of all these things, that these things are all applied a number ID. Excuse me. Have me a secondary thing here to open up. This entire process, like I said, we borrowed it from Springstead, and Springstead was acquired by Baker Tilly. So we're essentially using some of the stuff that we've got a continuous thread through Baker Tilly, and Baker Tilly's done a good job for us. The SAFE system generates numeric values for each position based on defined values associated with 6 skill levels and 16 work characteristics and 9 job factors. So essentially what we're doing is we're applying a numeric value to these things. Essentially, we look at each element, we apply a numeric value to it based on the criteria that the SAFE system gives us, and then we add those up so that the higher the score, the higher the level of the importance of the role in the organization, and conversely, the greater the compensation level. So training and ability, obviously less than high school diploma / GED. All of our positions here at the City of Branson require a high school diploma or a GED. So we essentially start out at the second level. We're looking at these things not so hardcore that, you have to have an associate's degree, or you have to have a bachelor's, or you have to have a master's, anything like that. We look at work equivalencies as well. And that also will include military experience and things like that, so that those folks that fill those positions have the kind of background that will enable them to do the job. In my prior life, I worked for a college, and from that I developed my axiom that I live and die by, and that is education and intelligence are mutually exclusive. You can have a PhD and be dumber than a box of rocks. I've seen it firsthand. So anyhow, the one position that we have that requires a PhD is our city attorney, because the Juris Doctorate is a PhD, and that's effectively the only position that we have that requires that. But others, you're going to see master's preferred, you'll see bachelor's required, different things like that. Experience, that level, we differentiate that by minimal, less than 1 year, moderate, 1 to 3 years, considerable, 3 to 5 years, and extensive, 6 or more years. Just kind of the basic rule of thumb that we took forward from Springstead on their SAFE program. Level of work, basic, intermediate, difficult, and complex. And human relations skills. This is one that says, okay, I've got limited, so if I'm out on a mower or something like that, I'm going to have somewhat limited. General could be, I'll occasionally greet customers, I'll occasionally work with other employees and things like that. Reactive and proactive, that's going to be the difference between I deal with complaints versus I try to go solve complaints. Influential and managerial moves higher up on the scale. Now we get into the things that are most easily to differentiate, and that is physical demands. Sedentary, light, medium, heavy, and substantial. Most office positions are going to be light, and some of your positions like in public works or fire or police could be medium, heavy, or substantial. Working conditions. This gets where, you know, again, it's kind of, it plays onto the prior factor. Excellent working conditions or hazards. You get down to the ones that are disagreeable and hazardous and very hazardous. You'll see some of the police ones, police descriptors, the factors for them, very hazardous, indicates that it's a continual, dangerous, life-threatening situation. Nobody in the city of Branson is under that particular factor, but they are hazardous or disagreeable, depending upon the scope of how often it occurs. The independence of action, that is, what decision-making levels do I have that I can make for myself, or am I prescribed this? It's standardized, directed, broad, or strategic. Obviously, the higher up the food chain you go, the directors, the city administrator, and so on, are going to be strategic in nature. Assistant directors perhaps would be more broad in nature to try to help develop that, and so on. And then impact on results could be incidental, advisory, operational, contributory, or primary. Obviously, you go down the chain there, the more important it is for each of the end result factors. And then this is where you get into a situation like, you say, okay, how do you differentiate what directors do? Well, I'm a director, I supervise 4 other people. So, or 5 now. In that respect, my scope of supervision is limited in comparison to Chief Matthews. He supervises 60 plus, has broad supervision over 60 plus employees. So in that respect, that's why whenever you see the pay matrix that we will have as part of the budget, that's why you'll see that scoring higher, or the pay scale higher for the chief of police. But, and some of this also involves supervising volunteers and such. So those are the kinds of things that we look at with respect to try to making sure that we apply some value that differentiates folks and their scope of what it is they need to undertake in doing their job. So this is an example of how we've put this all together. It's kind of a grid, if you will. And let's look at, if you can see it, turn your head, you can see where the skill level is. The planning and development director, that we've slotted out as skill level 6. A maintenance worker or a maintenance technician, that's skill level 2. An office assistant 3 is a skill level 3. An accountant is a skill level 4. And a supervisor 2 is a skill level 5. And so that skill level is kind of the foundational piece for all of the rest of everything, because it creates, there's grids, if you will, and I didn't want to bog you down with a lot of stuff, but there's, like a level, if you've got a skill level 3 versus a skill level 2, the value of training and ability is going to be higher, and things like that. You'll be at the same level in another grid, but the point value will be higher, and so on. So as you look through this, you see that, like on the for training and ability, you see that the planning director is an 80, the maintenance technician worker is a 20, so is the office assistant. The accountant 1 requires more training and ability, and the supervisor 2 requires less. Experience factor goes up significantly for the planning and development director, goes down for the maintenance worker, and so on. But you see the accountant, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Experience is significant for the accountant 1, but then it goes up significantly for the supervisor 2. The level of work, you can see that. That means the importance of the work overall. How are they contributing to the organization? You can see those. And then the human relation skills. To boil it all down, you just add up the values of each of those factors. Sure.
Human relations skills, a lot of the directors have had confusion there because they thought that if their person interacted with the public more, that meant more point value for it, but it's really the complexity of your human relations skills. So if you have to just answer general questions, you might see customers all day long, but you're not really having to have much skill with answering questions. So it's more about how much negotiation skills and how much real skill that you have to implement in your job for that. So I just wanted to clarify for those that are listening that they might see that their score might not be that high on human relations skills and they're seeing customers all the time. But it's really more about what kind of interaction it is. So.
Thank you for that.
One other thing I want to kind of point out is, some of the folks have seen the preliminary numbers of these, and we are still meeting with directors, and we are making some minor changes along the way because we want to make sure everybody has good feedback and input into this process. But the reality is, this is based on the job description. One of the things that one of the complaints I've heard is that, well, I do more than that. Well, okay, I get that, but the reality is, if I have to refill this position, this is what I'm looking for, is this skill set. It could be like, in some situations, if I have a director that says, well, my office assistant does a lot of my budgeting for me. Well, that's not in the job description for that office assistant. That's in the director's job description. And so if the director is subordinating some of his responsibilities, that's a different matter altogether. It's not part of the job description itself. And that's what you value, is what's the job description. Now, in the situation where the office assistant takes on more of the budgeting part of that, okay, that's great. But we reward that person through the pay for performance. We give them a higher score, they, instead of getting a 3, they may get a 5 on their evaluation. And that gives them more money in that respect. But if that person was to leave and we have to refill that position, we're not going to expect that person to handle the budgets, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the equalizer of those. And like I said, we haven't had a ton of pushback. Every now and then, there's going to be something that we'll meet with somebody along the way, and director, and they'll say, well, we've changed this position over to this. We're only requiring this level of experience and that kind of thing, simply because the position is hard to fill or something like that. We'll make tweaks along the way. We don't want to box everybody out and say, absolutely not, we're not going to change a thing, but we will modify things along the way. The other thing I want to kind of point out is you will see that there's going to be some positions, like if you look at the office assistant 3 position, current grade is a 16C. Well, if you move all the way over to the right, it looks like, oh, we're recommending that based on the skill levels and all those factors, that be categorized as a 15C, 1 step down. Now, I want to make sure that I'm very clear about it. Our intention is not to cut anybody's pay. No one's pay will be cut. The idea is, based on the internal equity factors that we've elaborated here, that if we were to refill that position, we would refill it at a 15C. It would have a lower starting salary, and it would have a lower top end to it. But it's by 1 step, and it's just an equity situation overall to make sure that there's fairness across the organization. And again, I go back to my original premise that in the past, we've had certain directors that would say, I want this slotted at this 26C when it really should have been a 20C or something like that. When you do those kinds of things, that throws the entire matrix off, and it makes the equity questionable at that point.
So Jan, this makes all the sense in the world. How often have directors superseded this and slotted somebody in at a different position?
Well, in the past, it was, I don't know, we would see it whenever we would see, there were a few times whenever we had termination in finance department or somebody left, and then we would reorganize and re-slot different positions and combine tasks and things like that, and then establish a numeric classification value to it, and it would be way off kilter. And then I would give my pushback, and then at that point, the city administrator would override it. So
Did that?
a
Okay.
number of times, it was a number of times.
Was it in finance? Were there other directors that did the same thing?
Other directors would give feedback on, hey, I want this slotted higher. I would typically talk to them and work through it with other directors, but finance was a little challenging. And again, I go back to the premise of internal equity. In my book, that's important, that I pay somebody. I have a methodology for being able to pay people what their value is based on something that's concrete and not arbitrary. Anyhow, that is the crux of, I could show you the entire spreadsheet of all 200 plus employees. It'd be mind-numbing. But again, I go back to the fact that Kimberly did a fantastic job of putting this all together. Again, we're working on it. We've worked with Ben on the compensation factor of it, and which is going to be important, because just so you understand, when someone moves down a step, if we say, okay, like the office assistants 3s, we would recategorize those as a 15C. Does that mean anybody loses pay? No, it doesn't. But if we rehire someone, we would rehire them at the entry level of the office assistant 3. Now, conversely, you're going to look at that and you see, okay, a supervisor 2, the idea behind that is that goes from a 25C to a 29C. That was a significant jump right there. That's 4 steps. Yeah. So in that respect, we've got a methodology in place for increasing that level of pay for that person, and we've got it budgeted as well. We worked with Ben. And so that gives us that equity for 2023 and beyond. So that way, when an employee, if, for example, we have to rehire a supervisor 2, we've got the structure built in right now. So the idea behind that is we have a certain percentage of increase that we apply for each step, And then we do effectively from the entry level of that position to their current level of pay of their original position, we give them 50% of that value as earned credit for their longevity with the city. So that way, if, for example, we've got multiple, people that move to a higher level position, and then we hire somebody new to refill that position, they're not above or at the same level as an incumbent employee. That way we keep equity, internal equity, and we ensure that people who have been with us for a while have a higher rate of pay than someone entry level. Anyhow, it's a lot of stuff. Any questions?
I know when you presented, first off, thank you for showing us this, because the amount of time and effort that was put in to make this equitable is almost mind-numbing. So hats off. I know you've shared that the attempt was to hire this out with a professional firm. That wasn't available, so thank you for taking it on yourself to say, we'll do this work, which is a ton of work. Would you share with us, I know when we were shown the different pay steps, the decision was made, I'm assuming, to put this in place January 1.
That's right.
Is there a reason why, does it need approvals or voted on by the board, or are there steps that need to take place? The question is, if we know we're out of balance with some of our staff, why we couldn't make it effective next pay period versus waiting until the first?
My only concern would be calculating the cost and developing budget amendments and things like that and getting that approved by the board. That would be something that I don't know that I could do before the next pay period. It might take a little while to develop all that. But, at that end, whatever the board directs us to do, we can manage it. It just will take a little bit of time.
My awareness has been raised recently on, we have some real key positions that we would benefit from having those filled sooner versus later. I know in utilities, in planning and zoning, inspectors, code enforcement, police officers.
Right.
And so I don't know, maybe you could tell us, some of those positions we really, really want to fill because we're just losing ground by not having them filled. I know we're only talking, 2.5 months, right?
Right.
So at least based on that logic, is there, what advice would you give us based on that of what it would take and what's your opinion on speeding that process up and having it take effect before January 1st?
For a person who spent most of his career coloring outside the lines, and after coming to the city of Branson, now I color inside the lines, I'll have to relearn some of the things that I used to do. But as far as that's concerned, making those adjustments and changes, we need to be agile as an organization, be ready to adjust. In that respect, I don't know, we've got 30-plus openings right now. The flow of applicants is not as I would like. So to that extent, if we made some adjustments on a short-term basis or sooner rather than later basis, it could affect that significantly. It could affect that pipeline of folks coming in. I don't have any aversions to that. It's just a challenge.
Chop, chop. Any comments?
Just a quick comment on that, Jane. And I echo those comments about a great job is a great tool. It needs to be used. It needs to be respected. I hope it's honored. You know, we've had some great tools in the past, and when they're not honored, they're just a tool sitting in a toolbox. So love the work that you guys are doing, and I hope that those up here that are elected officials and our board and city administrator will honor that and take this seriously and not override when we want to override. With regard to timing, I would just encourage this. I'm with you. Let's be as agile as we can, but let's not get in such a hurry that we mess it up and then we have more cleanup to do later. My 2 cents from one committee member would be, let's get it right. And if it takes an extra week or 2, who cares? It's a long-term play, not we have to have it done tomorrow, but let's get it done right. If we can do it in a week or 2 or next pay period or the next pay period, great. But I would hate to see us rush into it and then have to go back and clean up later. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Boy, I really appreciate those comments, and I like the idea of making sure Jan's got enough time to sit down with each director to adjust any discrepancies that might be perceived or real, and allowing them that time and space, like what Kevin was just saying, to make sure that we do get it right. And I will tell you, I have a great deal of respect for the classification system and making sure that we honor that. I've dealt with that a lot in my past state and federal experience where it just wasn't allowed. You just weren't able to jump classes. And obviously there was a lot of heartburn that went along with that. But I will tell you, the conversations that have been happening so far since I've come in have been very dynamic. HR has been super responsive to the directors, making sure that they've got ample time to make the case, especially on some of those more unique positions. So we've got a few of those out there that we're going to work through together, but I have the deepest respect for what this team has done. What an extraordinary effort and what an extraordinary outcome. So my congratulations to the team.
Yeah, and to that end, Mayor, I will say, anecdotally, I observe different departments, and as much as the department heads are responsible for their areas, there's going to be certain situations where internally I think, nah, you don't need that. But then on the other side of the coin, I'll see, you really ought to ask for more, you know, and there's a couple of those. There's at least one of those, I think, in my book, in planning and development, I think they're understaffed, and I'd like to see additional help over there at various levels, that kind of thing. Michael and his team are doing yeoman's work all the time, and they're busting it, and they've done an incredible job for us. And I think it's incumbent upon us to help them out.
So we'll follow your lead. This is your wheelhouse. And so I don't know what a realistic time frame would be. I obviously agree that we want to do it right out of the gate. But is 30 days? I mean, is there a goal of, you know what, let's try to accomplish all the things we need to do to put this in place? And like I said, I'm going to follow in 30 days from now or December 1st, someday. Is it realistic to put this in place someday before January 1st for the reasons you just mentioned?
Well, it may be perhaps kind of a compromise in there with respect to, can we get it done by January 1st? Absolutely. Kimberly is going to spend 5 minutes on maternity leave, and then she's going to come back to work.
Did you agree to 5 minutes?
I did. I'm softy.
You caved.
That being said, you know, what I would say is perhaps we identify the hot spots that we need to address immediately, focus on those, and let the others wait until January 1st.
That has trouble written all over it.
It does.
I mean, I'm just hearing from all the employees, we're going to get back into that situation of why did they get theirs and we didn't get ours?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about new hires and new
Oh, I
hiring
see.
and new employees, new positions,
Okay,
you know, that kind of thing, so that we can target new positions to get hired.
that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, I mean, obviously the thought process is 2.5 months versus we have some positions we really want to fill.
The reality is, one of the factors that I also want to make sure that we do is I don't want to do the way we did it in the past, where we would just unilaterally, as staff, make decisions where we should have brought it to the board for approval. When it comes to creating new positions, adding new positions, things like that, I want the board to approve it.
What?
Yeah,
Crazy talk.
that's just me.
Thank you very much.
Jan, is everything you showed us developed by Springstead, or was some of this in ordinance, or like the education, or just things like that?
This particular structure and matrix development was created by Springstead.
So what did we have in place before that?
Nothing.
Nothing at all? Just whatever you felt like paying somebody is what you did?
Exactly.
What about education-wise? Is everything on there just, if it says you need a bachelor's, do you count, like if they had military experience or worked in that field?
Right. We do like experience in that respect. Like, for example, in IT, I contend, at a senior level in IT, in the corporate world, you would expect master's degree and things like that. And I don't think it's too dissimilar for the public sector as well. But if you've got a master's degree and 15 years of experience in IT, your master's degree, you were probably taking COBOL and Fortran and things like that are so archaic now and of zero value to any organization, that it becomes more certification oriented and things like that, to where a degree, it's nice to have in many respects. And in some respects, like in the legal field, a Juris Doctorate is required. You have to have that in order to have a law license, that kind of thing. But in IT, no. I mean, there's not a lot of folks that actually even have much college in IT. So it depends on the field, is what I'm getting at.
So if you would, let's talk about the elephant in the room. City administrator, for example.
Okay?
We've had discussions on the value of a master's degree. We've also had discussions of experience versus a degree. So when we were looking at city administrators, and if there was a administrator, Kathy, who had 3 years as some director level at EPA, 7 years at some director level at DNR, managed thousands of employees, $500 million budget, 4 years as a state senator, is that an example of comparing experience versus a master's degree?
It is an example. And at the end of the day, whenever, like, to bring it back down to the director level, if a degree is required for a certain position, and that degree is not there, you look at that experience factor and see if it fits in that respect, or whatever certifications they have available.
So in our codes, do we have language on any of these positions that says it is required to have blank, associate degree?
No, sir. It's just
So
it's all in the job description.
Okay, so none of our positions say you must have this, so you do look at work experience,
None of them
yeah.
are in code, is my point. So it is part of our internal infrastructure, that the job descriptions that we follow, but as far as codified, and they're not.
Okay, thank you.
So is it safe to say that we should change those to just say must be 25, graduate high school? That'd be a safer bet
For all of these,
for every position except for the lawyer.
Oh,
You don't have to answer that, Jan. I don't want to put you on the spot.
well,
I do realize you could be fired on the spot right here.
25 is a bit
yeah,
old. Just saying. For some of our positions, we hire a lot of 21-year-olds and things like that, so.
I'm talking about the elephant in the room that the mayor was talking about.
Okay.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I realize you could be fired, so.
Well, look, I think a fair question, right, is do you just want to remove it if, there's education in what we learn with a bachelor's or an MBA or whatever. There's also the process of going through and getting a degree, whether it's a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, an MBA, et cetera. I guess the question that I would have is maybe not just 25 and, whatever, but why have it in there if it's not really that important? In other words, if it's just experience or that, just leave it open and just say, if you have good experience, we'll interview, we'll hire, whatever. But why even have it in there? Why say, we would prefer an MBA, but we'd really like a college degree, but we'll really take not a college degree? It just seems silly that it's in there, and I would agree that you just update it.
I go back to, I've got a bachelor's degree in journalism. Ooh-ah, So that's one of those where it's like, okay, if you were to look at my job description, any job description I've ever had, have said, it's more about jumping through the hoops. Have you made the commitment to jump through the hoops and things like that, which apparently I did. Not sure I'd do journalism now, but then I do have a master's in human resources. So that was a hoop I chose to jump through because it was targeted, and it was like recess for me. It was easy. So it's down to what it brings value to the organization.
Yeah, and my personal opinion, somebody who serves 4 years in the military, I believe that skill set that they have from that experience is equal to or better than a bachelor's degree.
I couldn't agree more. One of my best friends runs a brewery and spent 2 weeks in college and 8 years in the military and is literally the smartest guy I know. And, he got bored in college and he designed his own brewery. He designed everything about it. At our previous employer, he and I worked together at the college. He designed the entire infrastructure of the IT system there. And so, is it required? No, not at all.
And so, and I know the discussion is, if degrees aren't required, why are we even talking about them? I'm thinking that putting in there that would be preferred, no different than experience would be preferred.
We're migrating to that in most positions that have degree requirements, simply because the value to the organization can be, the fact that somebody has a degree and no experience. The prime example was there was a young man who worked for the city. He was part-time for a while, and he had a master's degree in human resources. And but his experience was zero. But he wasn't sure why he wasn't qualified to be selected for the HR director position. He just didn't have any experience.
Yeah, good example. Thank you.
I will tell you, that's interesting. People pay big money to go to 4 years of college. And on the other hand, if they go into the military, they get paid to serve in the military. I have a huge appreciation for my military. I don't know that I would say across the board 4 years in the military is just as good as 4 years in college, or why in the hell would anybody go to college? Go to the military and get paid for 4 years instead of actually having a big student loan. So I think you have to be careful. Your MBA in human resources is critically connected to your role here for the city.
Sure.
No question. You could have been in the military 40 years and not gotten that specific education for what you do here. So before we throw the baby out with the bathwater, I'm not sure we want to get rid of the colleges everyone go to the military, although
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, the thing is, if you spend 4 years or 8 years in the military as an MP, and then you come in and want to apply for a finance position, it's probably not going to be a good fit.
right.
Why are you picking on MPs? I'm just kidding. Actually, almost 4 years in the military and 7.5 years of college, so I don't know. Jan, to you and Kimberly, thank you so much for this. This is great information. And I think it's incumbent that, you know, you mentioned coloring outside the lines. I encourage that creativity. And I think, you know, what you're laid out for us today is really just indicative of kind of what you're feeling like we can now do HR. We can establish this HR department and truly work it as an HR department and not have concerns of people stepping over and changing the rules as they go along. And to Kevin's point, I encourage you to, this is the line you draw in the sand, and this is where you put it at. And I think the work that you guys have done is amazing and very clear and precise. So thank you.
The one thing I want to point out is there's been certain departments that have been in the past allowed to deal from an HR perspective with a little bit of autonomy. And in that respect, reining that in could be a cultural change. And we could have a little bit of weeping and gnashing of teeth and things like that. But it's one of those things that we'll work through.
But that continuity is what allows the success of this organization. You know, to have that kind of continuity is what ensures the longevity and just, you know, that standard practice, you know, and best practices in the community. So I think that's great.
Absolutely. The more we standardize things from a human factor like that, the less time we spend with lawyers and things like that. Okay. The next topic we want to talk about, we just kind of wanted to go over the list of policy changes that you can anticipate us bringing in the not-too-distant future. We want to bring these. We see some areas that are vulnerabilities or things that need to be updated, things like that, that we want to bring to your attention so that way we can make some changes along the way. And our HR manual is online, and if you choose to go out and review it and look through it, I welcome input from any of you to say, hey, have you thought about this, thought about that? You know, my very first thing that I looked at whenever I first came employed here was I was looking at the work period, overtime, compensatory time, and holiday pay. I looked at that particular article, and I was like, are you kidding me? You get paid for overtime? Overtime counts as vacation, vacation counts for the calculation in overtime? Are you kidding me? That's a benefit we give our employees. That has been a long-standing thing that folks said, don't touch that, leave that one alone. That's in the corporate world, they don't do that. You work 40 hours, you get paid for 40 hours. If you take a day of vacation and then you work 38 hours all the other 4 days, there's no overtime. It's just all straight time. So those are the kinds of things that you may review and say, hey, what about this? What about that? There may be some long-standing traditions, or there could be some things that we seriously need to take a look at. The one thing that we had in years past was that we would pay employees on work comp 2/3 of their salary in addition to their work comp payment, which, you know, that enabled folks to be able to profit off of being on work comp. So we eliminated that several years ago with the help of Mr. McConnell there. Going through these, some of the Article 1, that one in particular, I want to address as soon as we can. It's created, some of the changes that I've suggested has created a little bit of heartburn, so we'll have to navigate through that. But that is one where it's predicated on, we had an employee out in the field who attempted a little quid pro quo with his outside employment. If you do this, if you hire me for this, I'll take care of this for you. And that employee's no longer with us. But it's those kinds of things that you shouldn't have to articulate, but we're going to articulate. You can do that kind of thing. Employee compensation, we want to make sure that we get things wrapped up with respect to, I want to incorporate, and now this part is actual codification, if you will, because our city code references the HR manual, and so the board approves articles and the city administrator approves rules. We typically bring the rules to the board whenever we make changes in that, just as an advisory piece. But so we will incorporate the compensation part of it, promotions and transfers. We want to address that. We've had some conversations with the IAFF, and we want to be able to articulate certain things in how they are promoted and how that affects things on the pay scale. The employment process, we want to touch on that. The work period, overtime, compensatory time. We need to add Juneteenth as part of that list of holidays for the city. And then leave of absences. We want to, the one thing that, this one may be one that we do sooner rather than later, and that is simply because we're inclement weather. The way we're addressing inclement weather just doesn't make a lot of sense right now, and we just need to address that and fix it so that it makes sense. And then traveling on behalf of the city, we've got some gaps there. Tuition reimbursement, that is a rule that was changed by the most recent city administrator. Effectively, I want to change it back. I would recommend we change it back, let's put it that way. Because the rule was changed to allow tuition reimbursement for coursework that was taken 1, 2, or 3 years in the past. And that doesn't, in my book, make a lot of sense. I mean, otherwise, I would be turning in my tuition reimbursement for my education. So anyhow, the Rule 20, the city non-nicotine, that kind of thing, distracted driving. Want Bob to be able to update that for us. The Rule 23, employee retirement and anniversary recognition. I'll tell you right now, I'm not a big fan of spending money just to spend money, but this is one where, you know, whenever we do kind of recognition things, we're tightwads, we're cheap, you know, it's like, what was it? Yeah. And what? Yeah. Yeah.
So those listening online, the comment was, at 10 years, the employees receive what? So if somebody's employed at the city for 10 years, they receive $25. A value of $25.
But what are the retirement gifts? You know, they get, I think you spend 30 years here and maybe get $50 gift.
Yeah, so we all agree that's excessive.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's one of the things we want to look at. And then, let's see.
Excuse me, let me just clarify, those that are listening, I'd really like that comment not thrown in my face, so that was a joke, just to be clear.
Anyhow, those are what you're going to see in the not too distant future that we'll be talking about. We'll bring it to you first. We'll take it to the Employee Human Resources Committee first, get their feedback and things like that. Now, just so you understand, there's going to be certain things that, yes, we do collect employee feedback on. We want their feedback. But if it's statutorial or regulated by an outside agency or organization, something like that, there's not going to be a whole lot of feedback that we'll take, like our EEOC statement will generally follow what Society of Human Resource Management, what they recommend, because they're tied in with that. We'll be bringing that as an update for 2023 and that kind of thing.
Jan, I really appreciate you doing this, and I really appreciate your department going through these and making some suggested changes. I know in the one example you gave, an employee who's using vacation time would also qualify for time and a half. In my opinion, that is way too rich to do that. Those are also the things that are built into our model that are not discussed or taken into consideration when we're doing a salary study.
Right.
This position gets paid $21 an hour, and we're paying 18, so we should move them back up to 21 as the market bears. In addition to that, here's all the other benefits, if you will. Because I don't know that there would be, and I don't know this, I'm gonna guess, there won't be any or not many corporations or municipalities that have some of these things in place.
And some municipalities pay overtime for sick leave as well.
Okay.
Or count.
So for those listening, I was just corrected by Kimberly that there are some municipalities that do pay the overtime with either sick leave or vacation time, right?
Yeah. So those are the things that, we just have to take a look at and say, where do we want to put our value? What do we value more?
Yeah. Thank you.
I would second that. I remember back in the day when we talked about work comp and folks were actually incentivized to stay at home and not work and then make more than they would if they were, going into work. And there may have been some others that did it. It would have been ridiculous because it was just a mistake. It needed to be corrected. I agree. I think you have to be careful about, I was going to ask that exact question about overtime to pay. I think state and federal law are all right. It's paid by the work week. It's not daily overtime, and it doesn't include time off because you're not working it. The idea of overtime is that you're working beyond the normal hours of your day or a week, and this is both an incentive to you and a disincentive to the employer to pay it, right? It's painful to pay overtime, but to pay it for time that's not worked, I just think it's ridiculous. So I would share your thoughts on that, but I just think that's nuts.
Obviously, she has a comment.
The biggest concern is the police department. They have a lot of required time that they've put in for their vacation, and then they're expected to, at the last minute, have to put in overtime, and then they feel slighted if they're not really getting that incentive. So it's a lot of police departments is what I've heard. I haven't gotten time to research it since it was brought to my attention. But before we would make that change, I would like to research other municipalities. If it is more effective for one department, not that we want to play favorites, but if other cities are only doing it for one department as well because of special circumstances in that field, then that might be something we would consider as well. But I think that would be, before we change it, we would need to research and see what other groups are doing, because you wouldn't want to change that here and everybody else does it for their police departments and our police are going down the road because that's valued somewhere else, so.
Right, and to be clear, I was just encouraging that we look at it, but if they're working those hours, absolutely it should be paid at time and a half. If they're not working on vacation, when I had a staffing company, people would feel if they had been somewhere else where they got paid that way, I would say, that's great, good for you. It's fantastic that they paid you for that. We don't do that, and there's a reason that state and federal law doesn't require it, because it's not actual work time. So just something I would look at, my 2 cents from one committee member.
Yeah. And we may have some of these rules, but I think we do need to consider special circumstances, right? Sometimes one size doesn't fit all.
Well, and everybody understands that, or everybody should understand, I should say, that overtime is a byproduct of staffing, which is a byproduct of vacation time, allowed, sick time, things like that. When we don't have adequate staffing, we exacerbate overtime, things like that. And, you know, the one thing that we do as an organization from a cultural perspective, that we kick the can down the road, and that's with comp time. You know, we give compensatory time, which is if you, instead of paying overtime, you know, if you work 1 hour beyond 40 hours in a work week, for most departments, then you get 1.5 hours of compensatory time, comp time, or 1.5 hours of overtime. From a cultural perspective, historically, we've done that with, we don't pay the overtime, we give them comp time. And all that does is kick that can down the road, because employees can accumulate that comp time. And so like if you work comp time in January and you get a pay raise in March, and then you take that comp time in February, or in April, then at that point, that hour and a half overtime that you got really probably cost about 1 hour and 45 minutes of value. And so, and then again, it exacerbates the issue with respect to why did you have to work overtime to begin with? Well, because you didn't have enough staff. And then at that point, that exacerbates it down the road, because now you're using that comp time, you don't have enough staff. So it's one of those, that goes back to cultural issues. I find comp time is a bit insidious in nature, because it compounds itself. And, you know, one of the first things I did when I came here, I figured out a way that, you know, if you played it right, you could get comp time on comp time.
Sounds only fair.
So those are the kinds of things that you just scratch your head and go, So anyhow.
Thank you.
We do have, Bob wants to give a quick report on safety, so I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thank you. Hello, Bob.
Good morning. I'm Bob Smither, Risk Manager. I have a master's degree in music, actually. But I also spent 23 years, 6 months, and 8 days in the military, in an Army band where I did all kinds of other things, including being a unit safety officer, which I know that this crew, when they looked at my resume and said, what's a music guy applying for a risk management job, really? But they looked a little further and saw that I did have some background in that. And so, so there you go.
So that's funny. So when you applied, and the question is, do you have a master's degree? You said yes.
Sure do. And I still play weddings and funerals, by the way. So,
That's funny.
but that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'd like to do, kind of for the benefit of our new city administrator and those of you that haven't heard from me in a while, quick little background to kind of where we've been and where we are, and I'll give you a kind of a state of where we are with workplace injuries, some of the things that we're doing in the realm of safety. So first of all, our safety vision is to be the safest workplace in America. Very simple, says it all right there. And it's a great tool that we use and talk to our new employees in orientation, and when we're out educating and training employees, we talk about that. And is everything that we are doing, is it the safest way? Is there a safer way? Are we the safest workplace in America? And how can we accomplish that? So our mission is to partner with our employees to attain the vision. And some of our goals are, one, provide a safe workplace environment. We're kind of required to do that as an employer. Reduce and eliminate as much as entirely possible workplace injuries. And to get employees to retirement with the ability to enjoy it. So the first time I got in front of people, I asked the question, who here came to work to get injured today? Anybody? I normally don't get a hand. If we do, we go outside and talk about that, but normally don't. So employees don't usually intentionally get injured. So our goal is always how can we reduce and eliminate. So what can we do about that? So some of the programs that we have in place over the recent years we've been able to institute is, number one, our safety committee. We meet every month. We have representatives from every department there, and that's a safety zone. People can bring safety concerns. We can discuss it as a group, and ideally it's issues that we can bring to the committee and that I can translate onto management. And the quick example of that is the no parking area around one side of the island in the north parking lot. There used to be a lot of parallel parking there. We have employees that park adjacent to that, a lot of near misses backing out and navigating the parking lot. So we brought that to management. They said, good idea. And that was the issue, and the solution was put that no parking. That's just one example of what the safety committee can do as far as engaging our employees to be part of solutions around here. Other programs we have is a near miss program. We make it very easy for someone to, this almost happened, could have happened, here's what that was. Either we've already addressed it or can you help us address it? We make it very easy for employees to do that. We do monthly safety training for our general labor departments with Public Works, utilities, all three divisions, parks maintenance crews. So we do that on a monthly basis. We've got, we do periodic inspections and audits, and I just recently subscribed to a risk management suite with lots of resources for me from J.J. Keller, actually, and I can actually assign employees and departments now to do safety audits for us to get them more engaged as well. And that's working out great. Believe it or not, a drug alcohol program is a safety program. That's another incentive we talk about in orientation and also out in the field. Great incentives to not have an incident because you're going to get drug and alcohol screened as part of it. If you have an injury and need to be seen, you're going to get drug and alcohol screening. You do it for one, you got to do it for everybody. We do after-action reviews for all incidents. Find out where did the employer fail you in some way. We start there. Is it systematically? Is it a procedure we're missing? Lack of training? We start there. We might find ourselves getting to employee kind of didn't do something right, but we start with where did we fail you? We do post-offer employment testing for many of our positions. All the public safety are now our utilities department, and a couple others where coming on board, they go to our physical therapy clinic in Springfield. And they've done a job analysis for that position. They've got a particular course set up in their clinic to run people through to make sure that they're safe to do all the essential functional positions or functional elements of their job. So we'll use that, and it kind of plants the seed of, I have to be a certain amount of fitness level and a certain amount of health to do this. It starts there. Now, later on, if they've been out with an injury or off work or on light duty for 30 days or more, we use that as a fit for duty exam to make sure that they are safe to do all those essential functions of their job. And in some instances, we've been able to save firefighters from themselves. When they want to get back on that truck, I'm like, your knee's not quite ready. Sorry, let's give it a couple more weeks. And that's worked well for us too, to avoid re-injuring somebody. So that's just a little bit of background of kind of what we're doing. You haven't heard from me for a while, so some of our training that we've been doing this year is actually forklift training this month. We're doing for all those labor forces, give them the opportunity for some theory, classroom instruction, and hands-on in a forklift. We've done, of course, every summer we do heat stress training. We do proper use of fire extinguishers. We've done lockout, tag out. We do that every year. Chlorine safety we do every year, the plants that use chlorine. and we've done some back safety as well. Coming up, we've got some confined space entry training to do, some trenching excavation, some skid steer and backhoe, hands-on training, and some crane safety as well, and those are on the horizon for us. So that's some of the things that we've been doing, but I want to update you where we are in our workplace injuries. I just want to start with, we were doing so well. This past year, we kind of had a rough year, and it kind of comes down to, from a risk management and workplace injury management standpoint, it always comes down to orthopedic surgeries. When you don't have orthopedic surgeries, you have low claims costs. When you have orthopedic surgeries, they tend to rise. And last year, we had 7 orthopedic surgeries, which gives us, you total it all up, we were at $509,000 in claims costs for workplace injuries. The year prior, we were under $100,000. We didn't have any orthopedic surgeries. We actually got a refund from our work comp carrier for those low numbers. And I was hoping that was a great incentive to everyone to keep that up. But, you know, sometimes it can take one claim. Typically, you'll find in an organization that, 15 to 20% of the injuries are the major cost of the entire year. And just for example, I'll break it down last year for you. We had 7 orthopedic injuries, which were 94% of the overall cost. We had 18 claims, but only 7 orthopedic surgeries, which were most of the cost. 3 of those claims were from fire. It was a knee and 2 shoulders, and that was about 50%. We had 9 PD claims last year and 2 wrist surgeries from that. We did have a couple of claims in parks. One was a knee surgery, and knee surgeries are about $60,000. We did have 1 claim from Public Works, and it was a shoulder re-injury. Shoulders are more expensive. That was about $76,000, and that claim's still open. We had 3 claims from utilities, no surgeries. They were 1% of the overall cost. So we're finding that we have great success in our utilities divisions, in our parks, in general, and those are the folks that we're in front of every month. Fire and police, I did some research, and statistically across the nation, those trends are increasing across the country in police and fire. Police are getting more aggravated assaults during their arrests. Firefighters, per se, most of their injuries are overexertion, and many of those are from just slips and trips and falls and jumps off of trucks and vehicles and things like that. So the trend has been, what we're going to do is focus on police and fire now. The rest of our organizations, they're doing great. It all comes down to this, and we teach this a lot. What I'm about to do, am I prepared to do it? So, for example, a police officer, when he has gone for several days with pretty minimal activity, and suddenly he's got to jump out of his car and chase someone down, we call it 0 to 100 mile an hour like in an instant. Well, he's likely to get a calf injury or things like that, or a foot injury, and those have happened. How do you prepare for that? Firefighters in the past, used to have a lot of back injuries. The industry started focusing on back safety. They don't have that much anymore, but now they're shoulders and knees. You can also find that the older employee population are the ones who generally will have the higher claims. When I know for myself, when I was 20 years old, there's things I shouldn't do now as a 63-year-old because it's probably going to hurt me. Are they prepared? What are they doing? How do they train for that? Our firefighters do have gyms, so they work out as part of their shift. We're looking into our physical therapy clinic because we've had firefighters have injuries, go to therapy and go, wow, I wish I'd known now, or 10 years ago what I know now, just based on that. So we've been in communication with our favorite clinic in Springfield who would like to come down and well, let's watch them work out. Are they doing it how they need to do that so that it actually prepares them for extracting people out of a car and things like that. So a couple of those firefighter surgeries last year was from the fatality injury on New Year's Eve. And one of those had a shoulder tear, and he's been on light duty and is just about to be released, months later. And so we've got public safety who already will tell you that they're strapped for staff, and then they'll get an injury and they're on light duty for some lengths of time sometimes. So we really want to focus on that and make sure that the training that they are doing, it's got the efficacies to where it actually is preparing them to do what they need to do. So, but I can tell you across the country, police and fire, those statistics are on the rise in general. So it's a challenge for all public entities. So so we're looking at that and see how we can help them, because I can't get in front of them a lot of the times. They have their own training programs too. So I will be taking our claims review to them so they can see and we can talk about the impact to the organization, not only with public safety, but across the board. What is the impact of your injury? How does it really impact us as an organization and our insurance premiums and all of that? And so we'll be taking that to all the different departments and show them, okay, this was last year, but look what the year before was.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get to another year like that. I think that's kind of what I want to cover today. So any questions?
Yeah, let me ask a couple. Betsy, during our budget and finance meeting, she was asking Ted Martin about, does he have enough firemen for each truck or each station or each shift? And I recall visiting with some firemen, and one of the comments was, whatever call they were on, because they didn't have enough, one of the firemen got injured because he was reaching in a car, and if there was two of them there, he wouldn't have been injured. And you gave us statistics on the police, and I'm just trying to connect some dots. I'm wondering, people are getting more aggravated. I mean, it's crazy in all walks of life. But to tie it to the police, if the police had more officers and had more, the ability to have more backup, that may drive some of that down, because obviously two officers taking on somebody who's aggressive, right, will lower those claims. You took the wind out of my sails, because I was going to ask you to blow your horn, because I recall seeing a check, which was a refund from our work comp. And there was a lot of kudos to you, and should have been, because of what you do. But then you blew it.
I know. I can tell you that we have reduced, in the insurance and work comp world, it's all about frequencies of injuries and severity of injuries. So we've reduced our frequency of injuries in half from 5-6 years ago, where we had as many as 36 injuries overall. Last year we had 18, the year before 18 as well. And so we've reduced frequencies, but it's almost throw the dice for like, okay, can we get away without those orthopedic shoulder tears and knee tears and things like that?
Yeah.
So we're looking at how we can possibly address that, and we do. We talk a lot about, okay, safety is also, health is a very important part of that. We want our employees to be what we have health and wellness programs. It's all about, the biggest reason for workplace safety is home. It's not work. And so we want you to be healthy and fit to do these kinds of jobs that you do all the way to retirement, if you need to. And so that involves stretching and having muscle tone and all those kind of good things. And so, and proper diet and all those kind of things. It all goes together to be a complete fitness, health, and safe. But overall, because we can look at those numbers, the lagging indicators, we've reduced injuries in half, but it's just coming right down to the type of injury, the severity of the injury. And so we'll do what we can to focus more on, and we're working with our insurance carrier as well, who's interested in lowering our numbers as well. So we're looking at that and what can we do to help them? Because they do have things in place, but is there anything else that we can do? And one of them, as I mentioned, was our physical therapy clinic is interested in helping us with that. So we're going to look into that and see if we can help with that in some way. Oh, the other thing that I can say we've reduced over time is litigated claims as well. And some of our policy changes in the work comp industry, our arena is, one of the things that we do is if they have a work comp injury and they are scheduled for a doctor's follow-up and it's during their shift, we pay for that time. A lot of organizations make them use their sick time and things for that. But we pay for that time. We also pay for the 3-day waiting period that's in the statutes. And what that is, if somebody's injured and ordered off work, the first 3 days is called a waiting period, and that generally goes to that employee's accrued time. And then benefits kick in on the 4th day. Now, if they are off work for 2 weeks, work comp goes back and picks up those 3 days. But our data analysis shows that that's rarely happens here. Maybe the last couple of years we haven't had any of those because we accommodate all restrictions. As soon as a doctor can say, you can go to work and do a little bit, we'll do that. And so they rarely, if ever, make it past the 2-week point. So we'll pay those 3 days if they're scheduled to work.
Yeah.
And over time, what is shown is like we've reduced our litigated claims almost entirely. We'll have one every once in a while where perhaps a family member says, you should do it this way. And if I get a chance to explain to them, I can explain that, okay, here's what a lawyer's going to do for you. They're going to get about 30% more tacked onto your settlement, and they'll take that 30%, and you'll end up getting what you would have in the first place, and it's going to take a couple years longer. And I said, but at least give my insurance company a chance to settle with you first, because they take all that into account. And so what's happening is the employees are feeling much more cared for by their employer. They don't have the need to rush right out and get a lawyer when they get a work comp claim. So that is also helping in our claims costs, because those just make the cost skyrocket. So we have had some success there.
Bob, I appreciate the updates that you provide us. I want you to know that I probably can speak for the entire board when I say you're in a very important position, right? There's a direct cause and effect of what you're doing, and it's very much appreciated.
We'll continue to do what we can.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else, real quick? Thank you very much.
And as a side note, we want to make Bob available for the folks in public safety to help reduce some of those claims. The police folks, they glom onto him whenever they can. We want to offer the same services over to fire as well, because that's where we've seen an increase. So we figure they need help in training in that respect. So that's the kind of expertise Bob can bring to the table. That being said, that is all we have for today.
Bob, if you would you also maybe provide some of your input as we create our new police department? I know we're going to put in workout facilities, but you would probably have some good input for other things maybe they would want to have in that facility. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Nope. Then I guess I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion, we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.